Hello. The topic for this section is racial equity for workforce professionals. We're going to discuss race in the United States and how it relates to the District of Columbia. Many times you will hear people say that DC is different. The approaches you take in other areas may not work in DC due to the racial makeup of the community. As we're talking about race, we want to understand, why do we even have a concept of race? It was to justify the system of slavery. There are many terms that have come from what we should be aware of and understand. We will quickly review them. Our first term is racial equity. Equity is a term that has become a part of many program designs now. With equity, it is about removing discrepancies to create a level playing field for all involved. Next, we have racism, a belief that different characteristics makes one group inferior or superior to others. Further in this presentation, we will discuss the 4 levels of racism. Race. This is a group of people with shared ancestry. Diversity. This includes ways in which people differ. As diversity talks about how people differ, inclusion is about ensuring everyone is involved regardless of individual characteristics. Othering is when people are excluded based on a perception that they are different. Belonging is about acceptance without individual characteristics being considered. In an earlier segment, there was a discussion about bias. When we talk about implicit bias, this is when we subconsciously do something that affects our behavior. This term, pronounced BIPOC, is an acronym for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. It is people first language and describes a group that has been marginalized due to race. This term has been widely used within the last 5 to 10 years. So now that we have gone over all of these terms, we're ready to proceed. As a country and the world has progressed, we are becoming more inclusive and recognizing different groups. A good example of this would be the one thing that happens every 10 years, the US Census. When the census began in the United States in 1790, it only had 2 racial groups, one being free white males and females, and the other being all other free persons or slaves. The latter category meant for Blacks. Today, the census has 6 categories, with an option to write in one for your specific origin. As we dive into racism, we want to stress the importance of understanding that it is not just about one group feeling superior to another, but that group being in a position to create policies and practices that impact the less superior group. As we describe racism, we want to touch on the 4 levels: individual, interpersonal, institutional, and structural. Individual racism has to do with a person's beliefs and actions that serve to create oppression. These beliefs and actions can both be subconscious and unconscious, externalized or internalized. Interpersonal racism is expressed in the interactions between people, both within and across different groups, that result in differential treatment based on race. Institutional racism can be seen in organizational policies and practices that perpetuate oppression. Structural racism refers to the impacts of racial bias expressed across institutions and society. Describes the cumulative and compounding efforts of an array of factors that systematically privilege whites and provides a disadvantage to people of color. As we're discussing these terms, can you identify an example of racism you have experienced or witnessed in your personal life or at your workplace? Attached to this presentation is a document titled 10 Things Everyone Should Know About Race. This document describes things that can be very useful as we are working with our job seekers to help them understand and have these open discussions about racism. As we take a moment to reflect, think about how racism impacts workforce development. While you're thinking about that, which groups do you feel have been impacted the most by racism? When we think of workforce and who we're providing services to, it is safe to say the majority of our residents are coming from Ward 7 and 8, and the majority of our programs do outreach and provide services in Ward 7 and 8. These stats show us that Ward 7 and 8 have the most need, which is the reason why we do this. On this slide, we see that African Americans have a much higher unemployment rate than any other group in the district. The discrepancies between race is nothing new, and there have been programs put in place to try and provide supports. Sometimes they have helped, and sometimes they have hindered. The first one is the Wagner-Peiser Act of 1933, which is the foundation of today's public workforce development system. This was designed to reward and advance people based on individual merit, talent, and ability, but it did not account for explicit biases and barriers faced by people of color. This ensured disproportionate benefits to white workers over workers of color. Next, we have the Social Security Act of 1935. This created a pension program for the elderly and unemployment insurance for displaced workers. We have the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. This created the right to minimum wage and overtime pay. Unfortunately, the Fair Labor Standards Act and the Social Security Act excluded agricultural and domestic workers from these benefits and protections, leaving out about 2/3 of Black workers. We have the federal workforce development legislation. This includes many of the programs we have heard of, such as the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act of 1973, the Job Training Partnership Act of 1982, WIA, and now WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act of 2014. These acts have targeted services to populations earning low incomes and experiencing barriers to employment, but shift away from a racial conscious approach, which can have a negative impact on people of color. So, as we talk about race and programs and supports, there are many supports in place, especially here in Washington, D.C., which we consider to be very resource rich. The array of organizations available through the district is a great example of that. But how are residents impacted? This takes us to our benefits cliff, also known as the cliff effect. Many times we may feel that we are adding a benefit to our candidates by connecting them with employment opportunities. Have you ever helped a job seeker and they turn down a job and you wonder why? How are you as a coach even considering the impact that that income can have on the residents that we are serving? Currently, many of our residents may qualify for childcare allowances, housing vouchers, SNAP and food stamp, or other tax credits. In this example, we're going to look at Veronica. Veronica is a 40-year-old single mother with 3 children. Many of us may have worked with someone similar to Veronica. Veronica was doing minimal work and earning $1,000 a year. You may think, how can someone actually survive on $1,000 a year? But then let's look at the benefits Veronica's receiving. The largest expense that many of us have is housing. Having children with an income that low will allow Veronica to receive housing supports. That can be done in the way of a voucher or any other housing subsidy programs. While she is out shopping, Veronica hears the store is hiring. She applies and is hired due to her skills-based approach. Now that Veronica is working 30 hours a week, her earned income is over 25,000. As we are comparing the two, you do see that Veronica is actually bringing in more money, but she has lost some of her benefits. The main one being a reduction in her housing. As we discuss benefits with our job seekers, we want to understand the terminology used so we can help them be aware of what is going on in their situations. These are just a few terms that can help with those conversations. I would also like to share with you this tool that can be used with job seekers as we are discussing their benefits. This link is a resource also available with the presentation. This database allows you to select your state. Once you have identified your state, you can enter information about your participant. In this case, Veronica does not have a disability. Veronica is 40 and she has 3 children. So we're able to list the ages of the children. Here, we're able to add any other public assistance programs. As we are in Washington, D.C., we're only using those that apply to our area. Feel free to use anything that is applicable to your area. And then you update the chart. Once you update the chart, you will see how the benefits change based on the person's income. If they are earning $1,000, this shows you how many supports they will receive. As their income goes up, you'll see certain resources go down. This tool is very useful to use when speaking to job seekers and providing financial guidance and preparing them for their next steps. Now, after going through our segment, how would you explain the concepts of benefit cliff, benefits plateau, and net financial resources to your job seekers? Thank you and have a wonderful day.